All right, understanding integers is our next section here. And if you're like, but Miss Sanchez, I don't even know what an integer is. An integer is just a whole number, a number that is not a fraction. Okay, so we're just dealing with whole numbers, understanding them. They can be positive, they can be negative, or they can be zero, but just a whole number, no decimals, no fractions. Okay, so for this first one, a little bit of science, chemistry. So if you liked chemistry, maybe you'll like this problem. Atoms contain protons, neutrons, and electrons. Each proton has a positive charge, each electron has a negative charge, and neutrons have no charge. An atom, by definition, is neutral and has the same number of protons and electrons. An atom can gain or lose electrons and become a charged particle called an ion. A positive ion has more protons than electrons, while a negative ion has more electrons than protons. So I underlined those important key pieces of information that will help us through this next problem, because I personally struggle with protons, electrons, atoms, I all of that. I don't know what they mean, so I highlighted it so I could refer back to it. Use the information about atoms and ions to complete the charge from protons and charge from electrons column in the following table. So a sodium atom, and remember atom was neutral, so same number of protons, same number of electrons. And protons were positive and electrons were negative. Notice here, there's no symbol at the top, positive or negative. There's nothing there where I've got highlighted in blue. It's neutral. This atom is neutral. 11 protons and 11 electrons. What is the charge from the protons? Well, it's just positive 11. And then charge from electrons is negative 11. A sodium ion, remember an ion, it's somehow charged, either positive or negative. In this case, they're telling us that it's positive because there's a little plus sign above the Na. So there's 11 protons, 10 electrons. So we have the charge from protons is plus 11, and the charge from the electron is negative 10. Chlorine atom, very similar to the sodium atom. We have 17 protons, 17 electrons. So we have plus 17 and a minus 17. And then chlorine ion with a negative charge. So that means we have more electrons than we do protons. So we had a plus 17 and a minus 18. Aluminum atom, neutral, 13 protons, 13 electrons. So plus 13, minus 13. And then the last one is different than the rest of them. Aluminum ion. Now notice that the charge is 3 plus. So it means that there's 3 more positives than there are negatives. So 13 and 10. So we've got plus 13 and a minus 10. Hopefully you didn't find that too overly difficult. Number 2, the abbreviation for an ion includes either a positive or a negative exponent that represents the net charge, which is what you saw I have highlighted up in that same chart. If the net charge of an ion is plus 1 or minus 1, only a positive or negative sign is shown, since the 1 is implied. Because the net charge of an atom is 0, no exponent is written. So atom is always a dead giveaway that the net charge is 0, neither positive nor negative. Explain how to determine the net charge, which is shown on the atom or ion symbol in the table above. So how would we figure these pluses, minuses, 3 plus, or just something is neutral? Well, the net charge of an element is just the sum of the charge from the protons and electrons. So if we added, let's say right here, if we added 13 plus negative 10 or 13 minus 10, we get 3, which is why we have a 3 plus. If I added for this one right here, 17 plus negative 18 or 17 minus 18, we get negative 1. Thus, the negative symbol. The 1, remember, was implied. If that confuses you, you can always write the 1 in. I don't think anyone's really going to get too mad. Now, for something that's neutral, aside from the atom word being a dead giveaway that it's going to neutral out, you can always add the charges of the protons and electrons. 17 minus 17 is 0, meaning that there's no charge. Okay, so I'll quickly write that answer in case you are trying to copy it down. Okay, the net charge of an element is the sum of the charge from protons and electrons. Number 3, an atom can become a charged ion only by gaining or losing electrons, not protons. An atom and an ion of the same element always have the same number of protons. Use this information to complete the following chart. Okay, so I've already included whether it's neutral, positive, negative, how much it's negative by, how much it's positive by. I also wrote in that protons were positive, electrons were negative, and the net charge was protons plus electrons. Let's go ahead. So remember, protons plus electrons equals a net charge. And if this hydrogen atom is neutral, the net charge is going to be 0. We already knew that. Atoms don't have a charge. So 1 plus what is 0? Negative 1. Oh, good answer, good answer. Negative 1. So the number of electrons, which are negative, is 1. I don't need to write the negative sign because all electrons are negative. So that negative is just implied because it's an electron. A hydrogen ion is H plus, so it has one more positive charge than it does a negative charge. So if the net charge is a plus 1, we have 0 electrons. What plus 0 equals 1? Well, it's 1. An oxygen atom, neutral charge. Okay, if we have 8 electrons, that means that we will have 8 protons. They will cancel each other out, and our net charge will be 0. We knew it was 0 because it's an atom and it has no charge. For the oxygen ion, there's 2 negatives. Okay. Remember, up in the directions, an atom and an ion of the same element always have the same number of protons. Okay, so when we do this oxygen atom, oxygen ion, they always have the same number of protons. So that means that it's an 8 here because it's going to be the same. That's what they told us. Now, since it's negative 2, I need to have 2 more electrons than protons, which is 10. Because if I add 8 plus negative 10, I'll get negative 2. For calcium atom, I have 20 protons, meaning that I will have 20 electrons because it's neutral, and the net charge will be 0. And then for calcium ion, remember, atoms and ions have the same number of protons, so automatically know that there's 20 protons in that ion. And then there's a positive 2 charge, meaning that there's 2 more protons than electrons. So I'll have 18 electrons, and my net charge will be positive 2. Because remember, all of the electrons are negative, so they're all being subtracted. And then I think our next one is number 4. What kind of numbers would you use to answer the following question? How many cars are there in a parking lot? Well, are we going to use negative numbers? Are we going to use decimals? Are we going to use fractions? No, we're going to use whole numbers, which would include 0, 1, 2, 3, ... forever and ever until the parking lot runs out of space. And then for B, what is the depth of a submarine relative to the sea level if it is descending at a rate of 200 feet per hour? Well, we would describe the depth of the submarine. Sea level is considered 0, so anything below sea level is going to be a negative number. And we don't really care about the 200 feet per hour that it's descending at. That doesn't really make any difference to this problem, whether it's descending at 1 foot per hour or 7,000 feet per hour. It's still going to be a negative number. C, Beth purchases a candy bar to share with her children and husband. How much will each person get? Well, she has one candy bar and she's splitting the one candy bar with her children and husband. Each person is going to get a fraction of that one candy bar. Or you could say decimals because fractions can be written as decimals if you so choose. Jake uses a spreadsheet to keep track of his finances. He lists all purchases and bills for the month as well as income. How much money will he have left after paying his bills? So money is written in the form of decimals. And since we are listing his purchases and bills, which are both negative numbers, and income, which is a positive number, we're going to say that these decimals can be described as either a positive or a negative number. Because maybe he spent more on his purchases and his bills than he made. Number 5, what is the opposite of -8? The opposite of a negative is a positive. It's a +8. Find the absolute value of -11. It's just 11. What is the sign of 24? The sign of 24 is positive. And the size, so how big in the positive direction is it? It is a size 24. It is 24 positive spaces from 0. Read and simplify minus -6. So to simplify, remember 2 negatives make a positive. And if we were to read and simplify, negative absolute value of -6 or minus absolute value of -6, this would be a negative, would stay there. Absolute value of -6 is +6. So our answer, simplified answer, is -6. Number 6, the following examples do not use negative numbers. The following examples do not use negative numbers, but each has a positive or negative meaning. Determine whether the meaning is positive or negative. If it's negative, write using a negative number. So 500 feet below sea level. We already said that sea level, like at sea level, is 0. Anything below sea level is a negative number. Anything above sea level is a positive number. So this would be negative, and we would be at -100 feet. And then $500 in the black. In the black is a finance term or an accounting term. So if you've taken a finance class or an econ class, you've probably heard in the black or in the red. Red is negative. Okay, so in the black is positive. So we have positive. And we don't need to write the number because they only asked us to write negatives. Number 7, the following situations contain negative numbers used in real life situations. Interpret what each one means. Minus 30 degrees Fahrenheit. We are 30 degrees below 0. A poll has a plus or minus 3% margin of error. So this means that the results can range 3% more or less than the reported results or numbers. Okay, so let me write that down. And what this means, so a poll would be like a voting poll. So with the elections coming up in November, you will often see a percent margin of error because with millions and millions and millions of people voting, it is sometimes very hard or difficult to have a 100% accurate. So if President A has 46% of the vote with a plus or minus 2%. So we have 46%. This is President A. Okay, 46% of the vote plus or minus 2% margin of error because sometimes votes are miscounted, usually not a huge margin of error. If you had a 90% margin of error, that's terrible margin of error. So this means that in reality, President A could have between 44% and 48% of the vote. So if you're big on politics and you are watching the election come November, and you notice that if you added up the 2% from President A and President B, sometimes they won't necessarily add up to 100%, and you're like, wow, whoever wrote that is really bad at math. It doesn't add up to 100%. That's because they're also factoring in the margin of error. They can't say that President A has 46% and President B has 54% because there is that margin of error and they're not 100% sure what the actual count is. So just a little lesson on margin of error there. All right, number 8, write a sentence to explain Lily Lake's enrollment. So Lily Lake is this elementary school here, and it is in Stillwater Area School District. So kind of like Round Lake, we have 5 elementary schools. Okay, so all of these elementary schools are in the district, and these are the projected K through 6 enrollment changes from 2013 to 2018. So over here, we have percent change in enrollment with a positive growth. And over here, we have these negative percentages, meaning that the enrollment is going down. So for Lily Lake specifically, it looks like their enrollment is expected to drop by about 12%. So if you need to pause the video while you write that down, go ahead. Otherwise, I'm just going to keep going on. And then if you want to go ahead and read through this sticky note, I think it speaks a lot of truth, especially as we're in this remote environment. One component to success in a math class is simply your attitude. It's the belief about yourself and your abilities, as well as how you approach different situations. So if you're sitting here complaining about e-learning, you're probably going to have a very bad attitude towards your classes. It might not just be this class. It could be any one of your classes. And if you're approaching it in a negative way, it'll probably reflect in your grades. So some ways to demonstrate just a good attitude in any one of your classes is to attend and participate in every class. So logging onto those Zooms, even though I know sometimes they're really boring, not the most exciting thing to do with your time, especially since you're at home. Complete all of your assignments on time so you're not feeling overwhelmed and just this like complete sense of, oh my gosh, I have so much English homework to do. I hate this. Once you start getting that attitude, you're going to start hating the class. Reaching out to your teachers to ask questions when you're confused, whether you email them or log on to their Zoom office hours, asking them for help. It'll really help you to understand the material and have a better attitude towards anything. Be willing to learn new material. I know that some of you totally don't care anything about atoms or ions. Neither do I. But sometimes it's fun to learn new things. Don't give up when you're frustrated, and work with your classmates and instructor. So if you want to reach out to any of your classmates or to me to work together, it'll help you feel a little bit more invested in the class.